السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. بسم الله، الحمد لله، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيبنا محمد صلوات الله تبارك وتعالى وسلامه عليه وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen. It's my great pleasure to speak and to talk to you today about a topic which is dear and near to my heart, something which has my passion. So I hope I'll be able to say something beneficial and interesting. The title of my talk today, the first title, Maqasid and Bioethics, remains the same. I changed it a little bit in the title, in the original title which you have in the program, between the narrow and broad scope. I just replaced this with thin and thick approach, more or less the same, it's just a semantic issue. This is the outline of my talk today. This part will have three elements: a literature overview, the key features of this literature, and some examples, which shows how the intersection of Maqasid and bioethics was expressed. And the second part, the thick approach, the things that I want to propose and to discuss with you. The elements in this part: what is bioethics, and then Maqasid of Sharia, and then Maqasid al-Tib, or telos of medicine. And the final point is the levels of ethical reasoning and the role of Maqasid therein. So in the levels of ethical reasoning, I will speak about the role of Maqasid, and my focus will be in the bioethical reasoning, but I hope my colleagues will engage in the discussion by giving you more insights about this when we go from the bioethical to the ethical in general. And I hope Dr. Tariq will be able to join us. He spoke with me yesterday. Okay, luckily he came. Because he asked me today to speak as much as possible. So that he doesn't have to speak a lot. I said, you will hate me if I did this, but we will see how far we will go. So this is the outline of my talk today. The first part, the thin approach. First of all, literature overview. We have a number of works, articles specifically, written by religious scholars, specialists in the field, who try to explore the intersection of Maqasid and bioethics. One of the early contributions came from Mohammed Tantawi, the late Egyptian scholar, who was at this time, in 1994, the state mufti of Egypt. Later he became the grand imam of Al-Azhar. At this time he was still the mufti. There was a conference organized by the Islamic Organization for Medical Sciences, one of the main organizations in the Muslim world working on the field of Islam and medical ethics. And they had a conference on AIDS, the ethical aspects related to AIDS from an Islamic perspective. And he submitted a paper entitled صيانة الشريعة للأنفس والأبدان. As you have heard the last 2 days, one of the main objectives of Sharia is preserving the self, حفظ النفس. So he added to this, in order to make it relevant for the conference, الأنفس والأبدان. So lives and bodies, how Sharia is preserving this. Muhammad Naim Yassin, Jordanian religious scholar, he published an article in a journal in 1988, and then he presented it in 1995, just 1 year after the paper of Tantawi, in again a conference organized by the Islamic Organization for Medical Sciences, and the conference was on medical practices. It was a general conference about Islam and medical ethics, and his contribution was on hymen reconstruction in the scale of Maqasid al-Sharia. The third one in Arabic here is written by Saad bin Nasser al-Shitri, published in 2005 in the Journal of the Islamic Fiqh Academy. Islamic Fiqh Academy is an institution affiliated with the Muslim World League. They also have conferences and sessions related to Islam and biomedical ethics. And in this one, it was on stem cell research. So he wrote a paper on Maqasid and stem cell research. In English also, we have a number of works. One of the early scholars who wrote on this is Omar Hassan Kasula, who is a specialist in medicine. He wrote Medical Ethics from Maqasid al-Sharia, and it is here published in the Arab Journal of Psychiatry. To the best of my knowledge, it is published much earlier, originally, but it is published in this journal, which I could found in 2004. There is also this article published by a couple of colleagues from Malaysia. The main author is Sheikh Mohammed, Sheikh Mohammed Safiuddin. Maqasid al-Sharia as a complementary framework to conventional bioethics, and this was in 2014. So this is just a list of examples. We don't have so much literature on Maqasid and bioethics, unfortunately, but we do have a bit more than what I mentioned here. These are just examples varying between the Arabic and English published literature. Also in CILE, we had our contribution in this regard. We had a seminar organized in 2013, in January 2013, and it was on the same title of the book, Islamic Perspectives on the Principles of Biomedical Ethics. Maybe some of you are already aware that we have an approach, theory in bioethics, which we call principle-based bioethics or principalism. Especially the four principles introduced by Tom Beecham and James Childress, that we have four main principles, and we try to discuss in this seminar how this would fit within the Islamic tradition. Can we take over these principles? Should we propose other principles? And of course, one of the key aspects we discussed is the role of Maqasid al-Sharia in developing these principles. And we had two religious scholars who made two important contributions in this seminar. One is Sheikh Ali al-Qaradaghi from Qatar, and Sheikh Ahmed al-Raisuni, one of the important scholars in the field of Maqasid, who also wrote a paper on this topic. The book is published in English. It's published by Imperial College Press and World Scientific. I was very keen to bring you some copies, but I had to carry also other stuff, so I couldn't bring some copies with me. I was supposed to share what I have carried with another colleague. He didn't, so I had to bring everything alone. So I couldn't bring the books, but we have copies, and it's available. You can get it from the publisher, but the agreement also within 2 years from the publication, which was in 2016, it will be available for free online. So those who can wait for like a year now, from now on, it will be available online. It is published anyhow in English, but we are also working on the Arabic version, because these scholars, they didn't write in English, so we translated these things. The good thing in publication, we didn't publish only the papers, but we also published the scripts of the oral discussions. Beecham, the main theorist of principle-based bioethics, participated in this seminar, and he had very interesting discussions with the religious scholars in this seminar. So you can read all these discussions also between him and the religious scholars. What did these contributions communicate to us about the intersection of Maqasid and bioethics? Three main things. The first one is the conformity between the objectives of Sharia and those of medicine. Especially the article of Omar Hassan Kasula, of the religious scholars who participated in the CILE conference, they stressed very much that Sharia and medicine share similar and sometimes identical objectives. Why do they share identical objectives? Because they come from the same source, God. It is God who sent down Sharia, revelation, and it is the same one also who sent down أنزل الطب. أنزل الشرع وأنزل الطب. And they usually use the hadith in which the Prophet ﷺ says ما أنزل الله داء إلا وأنزل له دواء. And أنزل here, it has the sense of revelation, something sent down, coming from God. The source of information, the source of inspiration is God. So that's why profession of medicine has a very high noble status, dignified status within the Islamic tradition from the very beginning. From the very beginning, we had statements of early religious scholars like Al-Shafi'i, you should never stay in a city in which you don't have a religious scholar to help you save your hereafter and a physician who will help you save your body. This link and this combination is, according to this literature, is based on this conformity between the objectives of Sharia and those of medicine. Sharia is about masalih al-ibad, and medicine is also about masalih al-ibad, benefits, to achieve benefits for people. The second point stressed by this literature is the meta-ethical function of Maqasid. The level of meta-ethics is how we can judge that something is good or bad. Where do we get our information from? How to judge, how to know that something is good or bad, etc. According to them, is that the parameter is to ask the following question. Does the practice of the physician achieve one of these objectives of Sharia? If yes, then it is good. If not, then it is bad. So if the act of the physician is to preserve life, is to preserve intellect, is to preserve offspring, etc., then it is good. If not, it is bad. So for instance, assisted reproductive technologies or IVF process, why is it good? Because it helps people get children, so it is preserving the offspring, hifz al-nafs, then it is a good practice in principle. And they go on with this type of reasoning. The third feature is that they both reflect a narrow scope, or what we can call the thin approach of understanding both Maqasid al-Sharia and the field of bioethics, or the field of medicine in particular. So Maqasid al-Sharia in this literature speaks about the fivefold categorization. We have 5 higher objectives of Sharia. Preserving religion, the self, human intellect, offspring, etc. The 5 objectives with the 3 levels, the necessities, the needs, embellishments, what you have here in the introduction the last 2 days. These are the maqasid, and this is how the maqasid should be approached. And also the bioethics is quite thin approach. The medicine is understood through a very thin lens. It's not thick, it's not complex, it's not complicated. So most of the writings on this approach, on this issue, the intersection of maqasid and bioethics, is that we have 2 people, 2 individuals having encounter with each other. We have a patient, we have a physician. They should have good ethics in dealing with each other. Although it is much more complex than this, at least nowadays, as we shall see later. We have many examples in discussions throughout the last 3-4 decades in which asking about the objective and intention of the physician became clear, and it was clear that they would change the whole judgment about the action. We have one of the classical topics in contemporary bioethics, organ transplantation. One of the key arguments for rejecting organ transplantation was that it is it's against the bodily integrity. It mutilates the body. You cut into the body, or especially of a dead person. And this is mutilation. This is muthla, which is forbidden in Islam. They use the hadith. Breaking the bone of a living is as forbidden as breaking the bone of a dead, etc. Later on, when the perception was changing, that it is not someone who is cutting in the body because he hates this person or whatever, it is a surgery. It is a surgery which we usually do, which is now a routine practice of medicine. No physician would say that I cut into the body of this dead person because I have no respect for his or her human dignity. Even if I'm living and I go to the hospital, I don't do this because I'm obliged to go there because he's gonna punish me. It's completely different perception and it's completely different objective. It is just a new form of medical treatment and tadawi. We used throughout history to seek medical treatment from the nature. We use the nature to treat the human being. But with organ transplantation, we use human beings to treat human beings. And this was a bit shocking because the whole idea is that we will not use the nature, we will not use chemicals, but we have a heart which is not functioning. The best way is to put heart instead of the heart. This is the whole idea. So this was a bit shocking and problematic, but later it was introduced as just medical treatment. The palliative care and the so-called double effect. In the palliative care, you give patients medications in order to minimize the feeling of pain. But with giving these drugs, minimizing the feel of pain can also have the effect on the respiration, the respiratory system. And if this system is not functioning, the person can die. So it is one action, but it can have two effects. It can minimize the pain, and it can also lead to the death of the person, although it is not necessary that it will do this in all cases. How can we judge the action? It's based on the maqsid of the physician and the maqsid of the patient. You want to die, you want to put an end to life of this person, or you want to minimize the pain. Again, here the maqsid or the intention at this level was important. One of the clear examples in 2007, when the International Islamic Fiqh Academy discussed the cosmetic surgery. And I'm sure we will have a lot of questions about these issues of cosmetics. They approached it from a Maqasid approach, very, very classically speaking. So they said we have Maqasid, some of these are at the essential and needs level, others are implement level. For the first, it is okay. For the second, it is not. So if these cosmetic surgeries will fulfill one of the three conditions mentioned here, all these three conditions are about maintaining the norm or regaining the norm. There is a perception among the participants in these discussions that we have a norm, there is normalcy in the human body. If we use cosmetics to keep this normalcy or to bring it back when it is missing, then it's fine. Because this is either essential, someone who had an accident, someone who was born with a defect, and we are going to repair this, that's fine. But using the cosmetics to go out from the norm, this is embellishment, it's just something I like about myself, so it is not good. If you have questions about this, we can discuss the main problems of this resolution on the cosmetic surgeries. But my point here is sometimes they had to approach the bioethical question from a Maqasid perspective. So it has been used, the Maqasid approach, in examples. But as I mentioned, this is all what we call the thin approach. The complexity of the Maqasid itself as a discipline and the complexity of medicine and the medical ethics or the bioethics were largely missing in the literature we have had so far. In the thick approach or the broad scope which I would like to discuss with you, is that we start first with asking the question, what is bioethics? And this is a key question because it will determine a lot of things afterwards. And understanding bioethics has its thin and thick understanding. And I don't hereby mean Islamic bioethics, but bioethics in general. In the Western tradition, also the same discussions about the thin and the thick approach. Van Rensselaer Potter, born in 1911, he is the father of modern bioethics. He is the first person in our modern history who wrote a book with the title Bioethics in it. There is a discussion, is he the first one who who coined the term bioethics? Is there someone else? It's a debate, but anyhow, he is the first to write a book with the title Bioethics in it. The book was published in 1971, and in 1988 he published another book. Potter, and from his name Van, reveals that highly possible he was Dutch person, but we don't know for sure if he is Dutch. From his biography, we know that he used to cycle, to go to his work cycling, which is again another indication that he was Dutch. But this will not help us in the analysis anyhow if he's Dutch or not. Potter was an oncologist, a specialist in cancer. He got his PhD in 1938. So shortly afterwards, he went to Switzerland to do his postdoc, and then he wanted to do another postdoc in England, and he couldn't because of World War started. So he is living, he's oncologist, he's dealing with cancer patients. He is living in the time of the Second World War. He could not do what he wants in his profession because of the World War. This has very important impact on his understanding of bioethics. What he noticed, Potter, as a physician, is that through science they can achieve small victories, small victories. We can succeed with this physician, with this patient and that patient, etc. But he came to the conclusion that science will not make the breakthrough. It will not help us eradicate cancer. And he's right, till now we didn't. Anyhow, he said science will not help us, and even science sometimes has dangerous knowledge, and this is his own phrase for expressing this. So according to him, depending on science only for solving our problems will not work out. It will not work out. We need a science to help us to do knowledge of how to use knowledge. The knowledge, this is the bioethics of how to use the knowledge we get from science. So science alone will not help us in solving the problems we have. He found that many of the patients and many of the people he did research on, he was not a physician himself, so he didn't deal with patients, but he was doing research on cancer. So he came to the conclusion that many of the cases which these scientists are studying could have been solved by changing lifestyle. If these people didn't eat a lot of fast food, if they exercised a little bit more, if they ate healthy food, etc., they would have had much better life instead of doing so much effort on the cancer research, and this can help also for so many other things. So he introduced interdisciplinary approach. So science alone will not do the work, and humanities alone will not do the work. At this time, they were speaking about two cultures separated from each other in the human thinking. Science is on one side, and humanities on one side. So sciences are busy with facts, and humanities are busy with values. He said this divorce cannot remain like this, and there must be a kind of collaboration and interdisciplinary approach in order to address the problems that we have. He said that we cannot focus only on man. but we have to focus also on the man in the universe and man and the universe. So he started speaking about the significance of having environmental dimensions in dealing with what we have. If we take better care of the environment, our health will be much better than what it is now. So to think that this universe is only to serve the man and the man can always consume whatever he or she likes, this at the end will have negative impact on the man himself, even if it's not on the universe. He said that to study the man and the universe, etc., science alone are not enough, and humanities are not alone enough. There must be interdisciplinary approach. He spoke about measuring long-term consequences, which we can call in our terminology al-ma'alat. We cannot think about only immediate and short-term consequences, but we have to think about long-term consequences. And this is the subtitle of his book. His book was Bioethics, Bridge to the Future. We have to think much, much more about the future. What we are doing now will have great impact on the lives, our lives in the future and the lives of the coming generations. And in order to calculate what will happen in the future, again, science is not enough, and again, humanities is not enough. There must be collaboration between them. This is a very interesting approach to bioethics, and this is what we call now the thick approach of bioethics. Unfortunately, the approach of Potter died after he introduced it. So he is the one who introduced bioethics, and he said, he called it the science of survival. This is the science which will help us survive. Science alone will not help us survive, and humanities alone will not, but the marriage between them and the collaboration between them will help us survive. There was another person, I don't remember the name, Hilliger. I wrote it somewhere in my notes, but I think it is mentioned in the article I gave to you in the material, who was contemporary of him, and it seems that he was also from Dutch origin, it seems. Anyhow, the approach of Hilliger was the first director of the Kennedy Institute of Ethics. Kennedy Institute of Ethics is the most important and most influential institution in the field of bioethics in the modern time. He became the director, and he used completely different approach, which is the thin approach. The thin approach is what Potter says, clinical ethics. We have a problem for an individual person, we try to solve this problem, and then we go further. It's not about the survival of the human being, it's not about the big picture, it's not about the big questions, it's about solving immediate problems. The main interesting aspect of this thin approach is that it is practical. So physicians in the hospital will benefit a lot from this practical approach. Should we do IVF process for this physician or not? I give you an answer. Should we stop the life support machine for this patient or not? I give you an answer. This is quick individual answers for immediate and urgent questions. But what Potter introduced was completely ignored, etc. He was not even mentioned by his colleagues in an interview which they had with him in the 90s before his death. He was very disappointed that he was not given the credit that he's the one who introduced this, and that actually the discipline was hijacked. He introduced something interesting, everybody was interested, and then they took it completely to another direction. That's why by the end of the 80s, he wrote another book calling it Global Bioethics. So it seems he thought that bioethics has been hijacked. Let's add something, a new adjective to bioethics to say that this is not actually the bioethics which I have introduced. Now I spoke about global bioethics, in which he wants to say the individual-based approach will not work. We cannot work with individual patients, individual physicians, individual hospitals, individual health insurance companies. We live on planets. we have one destiny. If we do not collaborate with each other, we will have great problems. So he added global to bioethics. Nowadays, we have one of the important bioethicists, Henk ten Hove, who is also a Dutch, but this is for sure now. He was professor of bioethics in the Netherlands, and he's very much trying to revive this approach, and there is a very good interest now in the Western literature in what we call now Potterian bioethics, the bioethics introduced by Potter. In the last public lecture we had in CILE, it was about human nature between genetics and the soul, and we had one of the bioethicists working in the field of genomics, and I introduced him saying a mainstream bioethicist. He didn't like that I say about him mainstream bioethicist. He understood the mainstream bioethicist that he is the thin approach. People who are busy with individual issues, and he wants to say, no, I'm not from this one. So it seems even in the Western approach now, and the Western studies, the thin approach has problems. And you know, it started in the middle of the 70s up till now. It seems people are not so satisfied with dealing these quick and immediate questions. There are some problems, of course, with even Potter and his approach. The first one is religion. He finds religion problematic to introduce into the discussions. It seems because he has a specific understanding of what religion is. According to him, if we incorporate religion, survival on Earth will not be important. And he says bioethics is the survival, science of survival. So if you are a religious, all what you care about is the hereafter and to go to paradise. So you don't care about this earth, etc. I can say, حفظ النفس, for instance, if we speak about Maqasid, will give a completely different dimension, for instance. About ethical relativism, he is very much influenced by philosophers who speak about contractual ethics, الأخلاق التعاقدية. We agree together that something is good, then it is good. We agree that something is bad, then it is bad. There is no stable source which gives us stable answers, at least at the theoretical level, that something is bad and will always remain bad. But when we want to apply this general principle to specific situations, yes, it can change, but it will never change the principle itself. But in the applications, because we have pressures from different factors, we can change in the application, but we should never change the principle itself. This is also a problem. He speaks about ethical evolution. That we can change our understanding about what is ethical and what's unethical by time. For instance, he was speaking about the necessity to reproduce. We should bring children, and this was something ethical. And now, in his time, he says it's completely unethical, and it will be very much ethical that governments will interfere and will force people not to reproduce. For instance, this was one of his ideas, and he wrote this in the 60s and the 70s. When he wrote his book in the 1988, he didn't mention this point because he knows it's against autonomy now. His own thinking is also evolving. He speaks about survival on Earth and then full stop. Nothing about the hereafter, and even he finds it problematic. But from an Islamic and even religious perspective, salvation in the hereafter, you cannot do some practices in order to keep you alive now, which will be at the cost of salvation in the hereafter. So this will be extremely problematic, and judging the ethical or unethical character of specific practices and to calculate the benefits only within the space of this life will be again extremely problematic. So, but this is a very interesting, and we need to understand what we mean by bioethics. So if we take the thin approach, bioethics giving answers to direct and immediate questions in the form of clinical ethics, a physician-patient relationship, this is something. And you will produce answers different than thinking about the broad scope or the thick approach of bioethics, that bioethics is the science of life. Everything related to life. It's about how you understand the universe, your position in the universe, the scope, this life, the hereafter, etc. So it will be completely different. To my understanding, the discussions we had, and Hink and Hava also came to the same conclusion, religious bioethics, whether it is Islamic or Catholic, they are adopting the thin approach. And they are very much influenced by the school of Georgetown, the Kennedy Institute of Ethics, because we have been flooded with questions, with modern biomedical technologies, and all what we are trying to do is to catch up with the questions they are producing. And every time you give a question for this answer, you find hundreds of other questions, and you are running after these questions to give answers. Now after understanding what we mean by bioethics, we can go to the broad scope, or to the thick approach of both Maqasid al-Sharia and Maqasid al-Tib itself. To my understanding, and these things which I share to you, and I'm very happy that my colleagues in the previous 2 days, I think, expressed more or less the same idea. The overall principle is that we have Maqasid al-Shari' or Maqasid al-Mukhatib. So the objective of the addressor, Sharia, is a kind of discourse communicated to us by God. So the one who speaks is God, which we call addressor, al-Mukhatib. And we as humans, we are the addressee, al-Mukhatab. He has objectives and we have objectives. The main idea is to narrow the gap between our objectives and his objectives, so that we become very close to the objectives of God. He created us for specific purposes, and we have specific purposes in our life. The closer our purposes come to his purposes, then you are on the right track. If not, you are not on the right track. If we take this as the principle, that the main objective here of Sharia is to help us to come closer to the purposes of God, to the objectives of God. Most of the discussions in bioethics, and Islamic bioethics is not exception here, is doing more or less completely the opposite. Instead of getting closer to the objectives of God, we are trying to bring the objectives of God as closer as possible to our purposes. So we have problems because they are not in line with the purposes of God. So what we do is to make concessions, to speak about necessity, to cut in order to widen the gap, but going in the wrong direction, I would say. Instead of bringing ourselves to the purposes of God, we try to say these are important things, they give benefits to the people, masalih, al-ibad in this life, etc. So we try to make some concessions in order to remain within the scope. Also speaking about the addressee here, al-mukhatab, in the general sense, it will help us get out of the narrow scope of patient-physician relationship. Medicine in the modern time is not patient-physician relationship. It's not about the mercy of the physician. It's not only about the good ethics of the physician. It's about life. Modern life is complex. This physician may be the most ethical person on earth, but he will not be able to help you because he's governed by a big system. There are health insurance companies. There are multinational pharmaceuticals. These companies, they are putting regulations which will not help now in the hospitals. As a physician and those who are practicing with you, you don't have a lot of options. You have files, you choose from a list, and then you click. You cannot go out of the list you have. most of the time. You have very limited options as a physician. So the idea that, which is very much deep-rooted in the, many of the Muslim religious scholars, once we reform the physician, everything will be fine. It's much, much more problematic than this. There are pharmaceuticals, there are health insurance companies, there are policy makers, there is money, there is finance, etc. These all are part of the addressee, mukhatab. These are all part of the addressee. So it's not anymore one person, but a whole bunch of people involved in this. And I'm very grateful to my colleague, Dr. Mu'taz Al-Khatib, who brought me in contact with the ideas of Taha Abdul Rahman when he spoke about the 3 levels of objectives. When we speak about Maqasid al-Sharia, we have 3 levels, and I think till now, we will see if I will evolve later about my ideas here. These 3 levels help us to have a thick understanding of Maqasid. So Maqasid is not only the 5 objectives, self, life, intellect, offspring, etc., but it's much more than this. There is the level of terminology. What do you mean? ماذا تقصد? What do you mean about this? And it's all about terminology, starting from bioethics itself, as I mentioned. What do you mean by bioethics? Is it giving quick answers to immediate questions? Or is it about understanding a whole philosophy that science itself cannot help everything? Science needs the knowledge of how to use the knowledge. So science cannot all the time determine what's beneficial and what's not beneficial. We all have values, by the way, not only as Muslims, but as human beings. If I am a father of children, my set of values will not be the same if I'm not married even. I will have my own concerns. I will have my own priorities. So what's beneficial and what's not beneficial is not only to be determined by science. So terminology is very important. حفظ al-nafs, what do we mean by حفظ al-nafs? In the understanding of early and modern religious scholars, most of the time is about protecting human life. So don't kill the people, don't put their life in danger, etc. But I think we need to move now to preserving life. Not just human life, but life in general. Life on Earth, life on the planet, life in this universe we are living in. We have now more and more evidence proving that if we do not protect the life in the universe, our own lives as humans will be in danger. If we keep doing deforestation and taking off the forests in order to have very nice chairs and very luxurious buildings, etc., we will not have oxygen to breathe as human beings. So it's not that we have a human being who is the master of the universe. As long as the things are beneficial for this master, it doesn't matter what you do outside this. It cannot work in this. And I would propose that حفظ al-nafs need to be redefined and re-understood. What is the intention? And niyyah. What is your intention is very important. People who are developing research projects. Science is developing and making big breakthroughs on the basis of research projects. People who get immense grants and money. We always in the field of humanities complain about the amounts of money that physicians take and scientists compared to what we take. These dedicated, immense dedicated budgets are given for what? For what? I don't have statistics now by me, but you can check it on the World Health Organization. If I'm not mistaken, about 90% of the budgets, total budgets dedicated for research projects and clinical trials, are dedicated to 10% of the diseases on Earth. And 10% of the budget is dedicated to 90% of the diseases on Earth. Why? Because the 10% of the diseases, when I make trials on them, they will bring me money back. So when I invest, these are the diseases which hit the rich people in the rich geographical places. So I invest in this so that I can get the money back. And these other diseases, they hit the poor people. So it doesn't matter, whatever I invest in them, I will not get my money back. So the intention about why are you doing this specific research project? Science, now more or less in the field of bioethics, we agree that science is not value-free. Even if we agree that science is value-free. We speak about neutrality. But setting the questions is for sure not value-free. Why are you going to address these questions and avoid other questions? It's not value-free. In Qatar, we have huge amounts of money dedicated to diabetes. Why to diabetes in Qatar? Because I think people above the 40s, something like 60 or 70% of the population, they have diabetes. So you want to help your people. This is your intention. It's not by chance that you are investing money in this. So the intention is really important. Why are we doing these research projects? Why are we investing them? If we do not have ethical component in answering the question of the intention, we will have problem. Clinical decisions. I know in many hospitals worldwide, not only the Western world, not only the Muslim world, clinical decisions have intentions. Many of the cases of people, of women who are pregnant, and they have children with low viability. So it's very unlikely that the children will live more than a week or more than a month. So they have deformed fetuses, we call them, between brackets. All the hospitals will give the advice, abort. This is not a purely innocent clinical decision based on the pluses and minuses of the clinical situation. No. These hospitals, they get audits and reviews, and these reviews record the death cases. So if the child is born and then dies in the hospital after a couple of days, this will be recorded, which will affect the final report of the hospital. So they will advise you to take the decision, not necessarily because this is good for the fetus or for you or whatever. There are intentions behind. So this means that the review reports should also be included. There are people, religious or non-religious, who find abortion unethical, specifically in some situations. So this needs to be in the reports also in order to stop them from giving such clinical decisions in order to have good reports at the end. So intentions in the field of medicine is extremely important. And what is the objective? Al-Maqasid. Most of the literature we have so far speaks about Maqasid al-Sharia, but not about Maqasid al-Tib. So we work about Maqasid al-Sharia, shall we add one more, shall we take one, shall we divide them differently, etc. But what about Maqasid al-Tib? We have a literature which is called telos of medicine. Telos is coming from the Greek word purpose or objective, and I think Socrates was the one who introduced this, and they have now teleology, which can be best ilm al-Maqasid, the science of objectives. But they use the word telos of medicine. It's a genre of literature speaking about the Maqasid al-Tib. And Maqasid al-Tib have changed. Telos, or the objectives of medicine, have changed. The purposes of medicine in the history are not the same purposes we have now. We used, historically speaking, we used to have two objectives for medicine. Prevent disease from happening, treating the disease when it happens. These are the objectives of medicine, traditionally speaking, upon which humanity has agreed that these are the functions of the physician. Help me not to become sick, and when I am sick, help me to recover. And Avicenna even wrote poems on this. دفع سقم وبرء مرض, something like this. He has his own poetry on this. So it is preventive and therapeutic. So we have a norm, what everybody has. When we deviate from the norm, we try to break it back. That's it. In the modern time, no. These are not only the objectives. We have predictive. We want to predict it. We want to know that something can happen after 40, 50 years. Something can happen for your children and or your grandchildren, and enhancement. So it is not our interest anymore in the medicine to keep the norm, but to go beyond the norm, to make the superhumans, to become much more capable than we are at the moment. And let's give some examples. For predictive medicine, all the genetic tests are about prediction. It's not therapeutic at all. It can fall within the preventive, but it is predictive in the first instance. So usually marriage is a matter of emotions. I love somebody, so I get married to this person. No physician will interfere in my decision. No, it's emotions, it's love. Now it has been medicalized. If you are living in one of the Gulf countries, it doesn't matter if you are a national of these countries or not, you cannot have your marriage certificate without doing premarital genetic test in order to know if you fit for your partner or not, genetically speaking. That's it. We have laws now. We have laws since the beginning of the 21st century. Premarital genetic test, because if you have a gene mutation which is not symptomatic, so you are only a carrier, and you marry with someone who is also a carrier, so they don't show the symptoms of the genetic disease, but when you get married with each other, this will appear in the children, and it will be symptomatic. They need to tell you about this, that we can predict this and tell you about the chances. Also, we can do it, so you didn't listen and you got married still. We can still help you by pre-implantation. We do IVF, and we do the fertilization in a petri dish in the lab, and then we see which of the embryos have the genetic mutation, so that we can cross them out and we put others. This is about prediction, but this is about also philosophy of life. We have now, I'm not mistaken if it's Finland or Iceland, it's a national policy, they don't want to have Down syndrome in their country. So they do everything to avoid having children with Down syndrome through these genetic tests. So we prevent them all the way so that we don't have anybody with Down syndrome. To help families with a long history of Down syndrome children, I can imagine, and it's a noble aim to help people. But to have as your purpose that we don't have any single person with Down syndrome, what does this mean? What do we understand by human being? Are these not people not welcome in the society? Do we want to get rid of vulnerable groups, as we call them? This is a philosophy. So it's about Maqasid, but it's a new form. So we cannot continue saying if there are benefits, masalih for the people, and they will have more healthy children, and it's fine. It's much more complex than this. Now what we call the design babies. There are technologies which can help you to tailor your baby. Physically speaking, and I suppose later on also emotionally, intellectually speaking about the level of intelligence, etc. We will be able to choose this. So you can choose the sex of the child, the height of the child, and many other genetic traits, the eye of the color, the eye of the hair, whatever you like. And I suppose later on we'll say, do you need quiet baby, naughty baby, etc. These are all possibilities available. Again, we cannot go on saying that as long as it is good, then it's fine. It's much more complicated, and we have now a field called gene ethics, because the old frames of medical ethics will not help us in this regard. I'm just giving thoughts about these issues. We don't give judgment about them, but if you like, in the discussions, we can get onto these discussions. The enhancement technologies, it is creating the superhuman being. Starting from cosmetics and cosmetic surgery, it's not anymore that we have a norm that we want to maintain, but each of us will have his or her own norm. So if my nose is tall, This is not beautiful for me. So I want to make it shorter. So I make it shorter. For others, no, to make it tall is the more beautiful. Okay, then we make it tall. Being white is beautiful. For others, being black and dark is beautiful. So everybody will create his and her own norm, and we can. We have the technologies which help us, and this is how it started. This is the minimum level of the enhancement. But later, we found that people who have specific health problems, and we give them a medicine, it helps them to recover. So the thought came, what if we gave the same drug for someone who is already healthy? So I take the drug because I'm forgetful. I forget a lot. So I take a drug to improve my memory to be to the norm, like others. What if we gave the same drug to one who is already normal? Will enhance the capacities, will improve it. Now these are drugs which in some countries available in the pharmacies, sometimes without prescription even. And students, especially when they are in exams, etc., they take these drugs. Something which I do not advise at all, but anyhow, it is used. We have now surgeries to enhance the muscles. And also to make you taller, to stretch the bones and the muscles to make you taller. We have this. They do it for athletes, those who are doing gymnastics and this stuff, those who are running. And if they stretch their muscles or bone for 1 millimeter, then this will save 1 second in 5,000 meter race, whatever. This is going on already. We have memory pharmaceuticals, memory enhancing drugs, cognition enhancers, etc. And we are very much moving now to enhancing our memories, that we can memorize things which we have never thought before. And we have different professions. For them, enhancing memories is a matter of life or death. Imagine the lawyers who can memorize the textbooks. The textbooks of different laws throughout the country. If you can give them this possibility, they will pay. They will take it from their clients later, but they will pay for getting these things. So there is a market. There is a big market, and you can even formulate it religiously. You can know those who tried to memorize the Quran, how difficult it is, how time-consuming it is. If we can do this, that you can do it in a couple of days or in overnight, what's the problem? That we can do this. We have even moral enhancement. You have difficulties with praying. What about if we did something so that you will like praying? You have difficulties with fasting. We give you something to make it easy for you. People who are lying and they enjoy lying. Can we stop them from lying? There are now trials working on this, on the moral enhancement. Everything can be managed. We move now to what we call transhumanism and posthumanism. Transhumans are the humans who who surpass, who moved the norm dramatically. So you can memorize what thousands of people couldn't do before. The level of your intelligence and calculating the possibilities, etc., can dramatically improve. So you will not be a normal human being, you will be a transhuman. And some philosophers and some scientists speak about post-human. We will die out. Our species as humans will not exist after a couple of decades, maybe after a couple of years, according to some. The creatures who will be here are not us. We will be like the dinosaurs who were there once in the history, and we will have completely different creatures with different capacities, with different possibilities, etc. So now we move from understanding the human being. Most of the philosophical discussions now, we had very difficult problems to understand who we are. What is a human being? What is the nature of the human being? Now, no. It's not about this. About how to shape the human being. How to shape it, how to make it better. We have the destiny now in our hands, say these people. There is an urge for eternality. That we become non-dying beings. We will not die anymore. We will live for much, much, much longer than others. And by time, we will not die anymore. And these are all possibilities. Some of them look like science fiction. But this is the philosophy working behind. This is the Maqasid working in medicine. Before asking if this is possible or not, you need to ask about the Maqsad itself. Transhumans, we are humans, but we will be with super qualities. Post-humans, we will not be humans. We will be more machines than humans. We will be different species. Yes, people will not recognize themselves as our descendants. But we were something in history, we disappeared, and we had other beings. So we need to speak about the Maqasid. We need to speak about redefining health. What is health and what is sickness? If someone is a carrier of a gene mutation and he doesn't have the symptoms of the disease, is this person sick person? Donald Trump, I don't want to speak about politics, but this is biopolitics. Biopolitics. Yes, biopolitics. Now, there is a law in the US about genetic privacy. I think Genetic Privacy Act or whatever. Health insurance companies cannot have access to your genetic data and your DNA. Donald Trump wants to change this and to give health insurance companies access to your genetic data. And this will be catastrophic, I have to tell you. Because health insurance companies, they make a lot of speculations for calculating the costs of your insurance. Maybe you have a gene mutation which will appear after 10 or 20 years, which will cost your treatment a lot of money, but we don't know. You are a very healthy person. After a couple of years, you will collapse and you will be in the hospital. It will cost a lot of money. I cannot make these calculations as a health insurance company, but when I have access to your DNA, I will know. So I will give you a completely different package of health insurance. I will say you are a very risky client. So you will cost me much more money. So it will be much more expensive. So you will be good if you have a good DNA. If your DNA structure is good, then you are a good person. If you don't have it, you are not a good person. It will cost you a lot of money. And we move to genetic discrimination. You will be discriminated not because of your color, and not because of religion necessarily, maybe also because of religion, by the way, but because of your DNA. The structure of your DNA will be a subject of discrimination against you. But this is, according to Trump and his administration, is economically speaking very positive. Because these companies will not make bad calculations and they will not bankrupt. So they will make better calculations to see how much everybody will cost. So financially speaking, it is good. When you calculate, it is fine. But for the humans and for the ethics, it will be extremely problematic. So we need to discuss the issues of objectives and the issues of telos, not at the level of Sharia only, but at the level also of tib, at the level of medicine. So if we say enhancement can be part of the objectives of medicine. Whether we agree or not this is ethical or unethical, the consequences are quite problematic. So if we say it is part of the medicine, then it is your duty as a physician to enhance me when I come to your hospital. It is your duty when I come to the hospital to treat me. If we say it is also one of the telos, one of the objectives of medicine to enhance me if I like, then you have to do it. You cannot deny me this right. As a state or as a government, you have to regulate enhancement technologies for me. And so on and so forth. Who is going to pay for these technologies? And the things even for the therapy at the level of gene, so when you treat the gene, not the body, it's extremely expensive. the very first gene therapy technology approved by the IRB of the European Commission. Maybe Dr. Tariq was part of this commission. They have approved a gene therapy for a specific stomach disease, which is very chronic and very problematic and very painful, and there is no treatment for it at the level of the organs, but there is a treatment at the level of the gene. You replace the bad gene with the good one. So this happens through one injection, and then you don't have the disease anymore. This one injection costs 80,000 euros. Yeah, if this is a therapeutic, what about the enhancement? How these things will cost to make you a superhuman or transhuman or posthuman who is going to pay these costs, etc. This is the last one in the last sheet. When it comes to Maqasid and the levels of ethical reasoning. This is based on discussions in moral philosophy in the Western tradition, and specifically formulated by the prominent bioethicist Robert Veitch in his book Basics of Bioethics. Very important book, by the way. I advise everybody interested in bioethics to read Basics of Bioethics. Very interesting book. Robert Veitch, Robert Veitch, Bob Veitch, if we want to say, Robert Veitch. And it's not his own individual opinion. He's reflecting a whole discipline of moral philosophy, that we have 4 levels of ethical reasoning. And I think we can best integrate Maqasid in this ethical reasoning, at least as far as bioethics is related. And I'm very interested in knowing what you think, what my colleagues think about this, because this is something in progress. I get dreams about it, I get nightmares about it, so I'm still trying to figure out how to do this. So there is the level of meta-ethics. Meta-ethics is about sources. Which sources you consult in order to know what's good and what's bad. This is moral philosophy in general. When it comes to Islam, then Quran and Sunnah must have a crucial place in this. And I'm very much skeptic about the idea when many of the people who write about Islamic bioethics, they say this is a nazila, this is a new issue, a new predicament, we have no precedent, we have no text. So we jump to Maqasid directly. I have a big problem about this. At the level of meta-ethics, there is no single issue without a text. There is no single issue without a text. What's the Quranic verse speaking about تبيانا لكل شيء, or ما فرطنا في الكتاب من شيء. Nothing, the Quran escaped nothing. The Quran escaped nothing. At the level of meta-ethics, this is 100% true. You have sources which tells you the general rules about what's good and what's bad. So going back to the Quran and Sunnah is essential, is inescapable. It doesn't matter which topic you speak about. All the issues we spoke about now, like enhancement, like all these technologies, it goes back to the maqasid and what we want to achieve in our life. And the Quran is nothing but telling us about what we need in our life and how we can salvation in the hereafter. So you cannot escape at the level of meta-ethics, the Quran and Sunnah. I would say also maqasid. I agree with the key feature I mentioned in the beginning about the that maqasid can work as a criteria for judging what's ethical and unethical, to which this practice will lead us. What is the objective of this? If it will lead us to achieve one of the objectives, the higher objectives of Sharia, then in principle it is good. At the level of meta-ethics, we can use maqasid in this regard. At the second level, normative ethics, from these sources, from the meta-ethical deliberations, we can create norms, qawa'id. grand norms. Like, for instance, we can say what is definitely commanded by God is necessarily good. When we have a divine command, clear and decisive, then it is necessarily good. God will not ask us to do something which is bad, which is qabih. What is definitely prohibited by God is necessarily bad. For instance, these are norms. And from the level of norms, we go to the rules and maxims. Sometimes I have some doubts if the second and the third can be merged in one. We will see what our colleagues can say about this. But at the third level, we can have what we call al-qawa'id al-fiqhiyya and al-qawa'id al-maqasidiyya. So the level of legal maxims in fiqh, and maxims in maqasid, like al-umuru bi-maqasidiha. Things are to be judged on the basis of their objectives, for instance. So we can create a number of maxims and rules which help us. And I would say up to this level, and the role of maqasid comes to an end. And throughout the three levels, maqasid is not alone. Maqasid is part of a much more thick theory than maqasid itself. Maqasid is quite thin. Is not complex. Is not sophisticated enough to produce rulings. But it cannot be ignored. It cannot be ignored. So it needs to be integrated at these three levels. When we come to the fourth level, casuistry, when we judge case by case, so you have used the maqasid in the first, the second, and the third, you cannot judge anymore on the basis of the maqasid only. So you cannot say euthanasia is unethical. Why? Because it is against the maqsid of hifz al-nafs. I would have problem with this reasoning. Why? We have also, at this level of casuistry, we have life support machines, which all religious, all institutions in the Muslim world who discussed this issue, whether they accept brain death or not, they say you can switch off life support machines if they will not help the person recover. But this is against hifz al-nafs. The person will die if we switch off the life support machine. Why? Because it's much more complicated than this. Much more complicated. So if you use only maqasid to judge, okay, this is good and this is bad, and go ahead, you will have a high level of inconsistency. It will be chaos. But if you take the maqasid from the first, the second, and the third level, you will have more or less the assurance that you are on the right track. And then you get into the complex network of factors which will judge a case by case. So I would say you can use the maqasid, the qawa'id, the theology, the philosophy at these three levels as I explained. But when you come to the fourth one, some things will fall and others will remain because of specific factors. We can explain this more when we discuss about specific individual issues later on. I have taken about 15 minutes from Dr. Tariq. So I hope he's not angry with me about this. This is the end of my talk. I have finished. I will leave now the issue for you, whether Dr. Tariq wants to say something. My colleagues will join to start the discussions. It's all up to you.